Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you had an enjoyable lunch and enjoyed the stretch break if you were able to do that at 1:15. I'm so pleased to be here with you today to open our session. Um, we are in the experiments and baby steps, designing your way forward in a changing world with Terrie Moore and Susan Hagstrom. First, Susan Hagstrom is the manager of advising, strategy, and training for the Berkeley campus, which means that she focuses on enhancing advising and coordinating support for the 1,000-member Academic and Co-Curricular Student Services Committee. Susan is passionately committed to the growth and well-being of Berkeley staff, and she's a certified life coach and career coach, and she holds an MA in educational psychology and counseling. Today, Susan is joined with Terrie Moore. Terrie served as the lead for career development in people and organization development, my team at People and Culture, before she retired last October, having co-chaired last year's 2019 NOW conference with me. So glad to have Terrie back for this. She helped to visualize the UC Berkeley Grow Your Career model while she was here, and has built a lot of tools that have been adapted by organizations here in North America and in Europe. So with that, I am pleased and so honored to have both Susan and Terrie with us today. I know you're going to have a great session, and I'm going to yield the floor to them. Thanks so much for being here, Susan and Terrie.
Thank you, Angela. It's certainly my pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Welcome to this very interactive workshop. I do want to put something in the chat box right now, which is a link to a PDF workbook that accompanies today's work. If you'd like to use it during the workshop, please download your own copy so you can type into it. Or you can just have two windows open on your screen so that you can work with a workbook. You can print it and write on it if you're able, or just write yourself answers to the workbook questions on your paper in front of you or in a journal. So whatever works best for you. Susan.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and with Terrie and with all of you. So the metaphor of a compass is really central to our work together today. There's a sense of coherence that comes when we make choices that are in alignment with who we are, what we believe, and what we do. So we're going to spend some time together creating a compass that you can use to guide your career process. And of course, you're invited to continue working with your compass and the other tools that we touch upon today after the workshop ends. Last year, Terrie and I led a 4-week series, actually a couple of those, that centered around the metaphor of travel and the importance of having an internal compass to help us find our way. So today we're going to be sharing with you the compass tool and some of our favorite concepts and tools from that workshop. Terrie. Oh, me, actually. So what a time of uncertainty for all of us today, these days. Our social structures, how we do our work, we're constantly learning new tools and skills, our health, financial security, all of these things are in flux in a way that most of us have never experienced in our lifetimes. We're facing so much change, whether it's COVID, economic stresses, homeschooling and dependent care issues for some of us, Black Lives Matter activism, social uprising and engagement. There's just so much happening right now. So before we dive into the content, we wanted to get a sense of what everyone is bringing into this session today. So Angela, could you please start our first poll? So please go ahead and answer this question. You should be able to choose multiple options. What are you bringing into the room with you today?
We're seeing a lot of participation in the poll so far. Great. So Angela, if you would please end the polling and share the results. Yeah, so it seems that the number one concern is stability or the future of my current job, followed closely by changing future trends in work and career. Health of family and self is certainly also a key theme, social justice concerns, and positive new development in work or life has come up often as well.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. It looks like people voted for all of these areas, so we really understand that you're coming in with so much going on. Sometimes it's overwhelming. And when there's so much that's outside of ourselves that's in flux, it's really important to have an internal compass to guide us. It's more important than ever. So our intent for today is to teach you a process and give you some design thinking tools that you can use again and again, even in this uncertain world.
So this workshop actually uses concepts and tools that come from the world of design thinking, which is concerned with building your way forward on a problem that's never been solved before. The word problem actually sort of implies that something's wrong, doesn't it? But I'd like to ask you to think about it a little bit differently today as a puzzle. Puzzles can engage our imagination at the same time that they pose challenges for us, all at the same time. Specifically, design thinking in life deals with what are called wicked problems. These concern times and issues where the criteria are constantly moving and changing. You can't just apply a solution that comes from somewhere else or that's existed before, and you won't even know success until you meet it. So, by the way, wicked problem, the term, actually was conceived by urban planners at UC Berkeley. Some of the professors at Stanford, however, took design thinking into the Life Design Lab, where they began by helping students who came in with a wicked problem of what they want to be when they grow up. You know, but it didn't take very long before they realized that it was a better question to ask, what do you want to grow into as you keep growing? What do you want to grow into next? That's really an important distinction, both with university students and also when working with adults over the lifespan. That's been, that work has gone on for the last several years, both at Stanford and beyond. And there are even a couple of workshops sponsored by your career development group on design thinking all year long. Next slide, please, Susan. Great. So this thing of reframing problems so that they can open up space for movement and solutions, it's one of 5 key mindsets that distinguish design thinking. These expose assumptions so they can be tested, and they serve us in many other ways as well. Mindsets generally are ways of thinking that avoid limiting yes or no, right or wrong kinds of predicaments. 4 others in design thinking are really worth spending a minute on. You know, curiosity is a really important driver and guide. Trying stuff, having a bias to action, reminds designers to take their ideas and questions into the real world. Some ideas won't work out the way you think they should or the way you think they will, and that's really okay. Collaboration, asking for help, that's really central. This is a collaborative process. Some of your best ideas come out of interacting with others. And last, knowing it's a process. Designers know that when their first idea is tried, it just may not be the end point. It may just be a beginning. Okay, next slide, please. So, okay, the process isn't linear, but that doesn't mean there isn't a process. In this workshop, we want to really get to the right-hand side of this flow to prototyping and testing our ideas. But there's a little background about the whole process that'll be really helpful. It begins with empathizing. So what we're talking about is really understanding what's important to the people who are going to use a design. And that, in this case, that's you, right? What do you need? What do you want? What moves you in your career and life design thoughts? Applying this, what you want to, this is where we come to the really central importance of having a compass, understanding the themes that are important to you in creating a coherent next step. But how you define the question is important as well. So actually, Chris Murchison actually mentioned this in his keynote this morning. He said, should I stay or go from my current job at some point in his career path was not very helpful. And in fact, he reframed it in a much more generative way. That kind of question, yes, no, should I stay, should I go, can get people stuck. And design thinking is a set of tools to help us get unstuck and stay that way. So a better question might be, how can I do more of what I like, what I do well? That question can invite lots of ideas, both in and out of your current job. So that's really ideating, coming up with lots of ideas for addressing a design question. They could range from working on a favorite project to changing jobs to opening a specific kind of business. Burnett and Evans, who are the authors of Designing Your Life, they say that we each have multiple possible lives in us. It's important to keep that in mind, and they could all be good lives. Of course, we still need to make choices, and that's where prototyping and testing are really important. There are steps to help us try things on before we plunge in. Prototyping is so critical to gather information and experience for making good, coherent choices. Lowering anxiety along the way, reducing risk, exposing assumptions, involving others, asking interesting questions. And I love this part. In a nutshell, they help us sneak up on our future. Okay, next slide, please. So Susan introduced the concept of a compass. Well, any compass really is a tool for checking the direction you're heading. I like to use the expression generally marching west. It could be south, it could be north, it could be east, but referring to a direction that's coherent with your compass. You don't have to have a pinpointed exact destination, and sometimes that's not even really helpful. But a general direction helps you navigate crossings, turning points, Chris Murchison might say thresholds, that are going to present themselves. The word coherent, of course, is really, really important. Remember that coherence in a career or life is about aligning what you do, who you are, and what you believe. So creating your compass means understanding themes that are important to you. As you see on the screen, there are certain themes that are really important in almost everybody's compass. These can include skills, values, goals, interests, even some aspects of personality. But your compass is unique, Susan's is unique, and mine is unique. All of them are. For example, sometimes a pivotal experience can change what's important to someone. Your compass also evolves over time. You have new experiences, changing perspectives, and changing personal and professional priorities. For example, as careers mature, some people start thinking what they want to leave as a legacy. And certainly current events that we're experiencing now have shifted priorities for many, many people. I do want to take a look at a couple of these dimensions. Susan, can we have the next slide, please? One of them is values. So if a coherent career aligns what you believe with what you do, then your values really are central to be clear about. They not only act as guiding principles or personal filters, but they also contribute to our sense of well-being. As Gandhi said, I really like this quote a lot. Happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. Now, I don't know very many people who get 100% alignment. That's pretty unusual. But reasonably good alignment, good enough alignment of your work with your most closely held values can make even the tough days more satisfying and fulfilling and meaningful. If you want to explore and clarify your values, there are a lot of ways to do that. And you've got some tools. You might recall that I shared the link for the workbook that goes with this workshop. Pages 10 to 12 list many of the resources you have on campus. So there are a number that can help with values clarification. LinkedIn includes courses like Taking Charge of Your Career, which has a values component. The link, I believe, to the workbook is on the screen again in the chat. Career development workshops offered through People and Organization Development often include a values workshop. Look for that, I believe, next semester in the spring, I believe. And last but not least, you have a tool that's been published by UCOP called My UC Career. That has a values clarification exercise as well in its assessment center. So the bottom line, of course, is there are a lot of ways to explore values, your own experience being chief among them. Don't feel hesitant to use the resources you have. Next slide, please. So we all know, I think, that skills are critical in the job marketplace. The skills you have, the skills you develop, they're what you bring to the market. But activities that use the skills you enjoy are actually associated with higher satisfaction and fulfillment, and even flow states that Chris mentioned this morning, when you might lose track of time because you're so engaged. When somebody is asked to describe a highlight in their career, I've done that often in both workshops and individual work with career coaching clients. Almost always, they describe a time when they were getting to use the skills that they really enjoy. These are called sometimes signature strengths, and knowing, understanding your signature strengths is a great asset for you. Again, you've got avenues on campus to help you do that, including a career development workshop called The Skills You Bring. It's scheduled for fall. And of course, check out other resources that are in the workbook as well. Now, that's not to say these are the only things that comprise your compass, but there are a couple of them. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Terrie. And I think Angela recently shared the link to the workbook again in the chat. So we're going to jump in now and have you start working on some self-reflection, beginning with the compass. So again, with the workbook, you might want to have two screens up, the presentation and the workbook, or you might want to, if you have the ability to print the workbook, or you can just write on paper in a journal or something like that. So we want to give you a few minutes now to build your own compass. It's page 2 of the workbook. And you can see here the areas that we're suggesting. So Terrie mentioned many of these, and she focused a little bit on skills and values, but also there's your interests, your dreams and your goals, important experiences in your life. So it could be the birth of a child or the death of someone important to you, maybe a transformational job or experience. Could be your personality, as Terrie mentioned, whether you're an introvert like me or an extrovert. So we invite you to make this worksheet your own. You don't have to use these titles. These are just suggestions. And before we start, I'll show you my compass that I created for the workshop series that Terrie and I did last year. So you can see I have some important events from my life. I worked in Korea. My mom's mental illness and dementia has actually greatly impacted my sense of what's important. I have some of my skills over there: maximizer, community builder, some of my dreams at the bottom. You don't obviously have to draw anything, but I made my little dream camper van and my dream dog, driving across the country, singing. And then I also, to personalize it, I also added some of my mentors and then some of the things that I say to myself if I'm scared or want to kind of build up my courage to take a risk. So these are just all things that have meaning to me, that help me get a sense of where I want to head with my life. So now it's your turn, and we'll give you 2 minutes. Actually, looks like we have about 4 minutes for you to work on your compass. So I'm going to start the timer. And if you don't have access to the workbook, you can, again, just draw this in some paper in a notebook or a journal. So your turn. About 1 more minute. I know it's not very much time. When we did this workshop in person, I think we had probably half an hour, but just to get you started. So about another minute. Okay, so just to wrap up the part that you're writing now, and Terrie, over to you.
Yes, thank you. So you've had an experience of dipping into this territory of what's important to you. That follows us throughout the rest of the process involved with design thinking. And where we're going next is the power of multiple ideas. You know, again, we want this workshop to act as a design lab so that you can plan experiments to run that can try out an idea about your future. So, what is that idea? This is a question that design thinking really helps with. So, estimates are that only about 20% of people start out with a clear answer to the question, what do I want to do in my career? For the rest of us, you know, that question can be a sticking point. So, what we find is that it's valuable to start with more than one idea. In fact, if you start with just one, you're likely to get stuck with it, no matter if it aligns really well with your compass or not well at all. Consider these principles that designers use to get unstuck. I love this quote. If your mind starts with multiple ideas in parallel, it's not prematurely committed to one path and stays more open and able to receive and conceive more novel innovations. So, in other words, you choose better when you have lots of good ideas to choose from, and you really never choose your first solution to any problem or question. So in a minute, we're going to ask you to jot down several ideas about possible futures for yourself. They can be close to your current path, as you see on the slide, an alternate path that you've had in mind, or maybe a bold dream or a wild card idea. Susan and I encourage you to flesh out all of your ideas, many of your ideas at least, after today's workshop. But today we're going to ask you to practice these tools with just one of your ideas. Okay, next slide, please. So before generating your ideas, here's an example of what it can look like to flesh out an idea about a possible future. This one comes from the book by Burnett and Evans called Designing Your Life, which I highly recommend, actually. Notice that much of it is in pictures, much like the compass that Susan shared with you. And you can see that it extends about 5 years into the future. I also think it's worth noting that the information here falls into several rows or streams. In this case, a career project, family, travel, and education. So these streams split apart at certain points, and then they come back together later down the line. So from that, we can see that this exercise is meant not only to be playful with pictures, but also holistic. There are other tools that are going to help to analyze the strengths of your various ideas and help narrow them down so that you can actually make choices. But you might want to actually sketch out possible futures after today's workshop. And in the workbook, you don't have to go there now, but for later reference, there's a worksheet for doing just that. I do want you to notice, though, the questions at the bottom of this slide. That's really key. If you let yourself freely sketch out a possible idea, it's going to bring up good, important, and pivotal questions. And they're going to be hugely important in guiding your exploration. So we'll come back to that. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Terrie. So we now invite you to a quick speed writing activity. It'll be just 2 minutes to brainstorm some possible futures and then pick one to work with today. Please don't think too hard about these or feel like you have to have the perfect answer. Again, we're just practicing with the tools. So you'll just pick something and then you can use these tools again on your own. So if you could please turn to page 3 of your workbook. It looks like this page that's up on the screen. And we'll spend 2 minutes brainstorming. So as Terrie mentioned, there's different possibilities. So you may decide to just stick with what you're doing now, changing it a little bit. You might want to apply for a different job at UC Berkeley. Some people might want to be retiring in a few years. You might, maybe you want to transition to another line of work entirely. Maybe you want to run your own business. This is your dream, is to run your own business. So just brainstorm 3 possible futures and then pick one, and you're not committed to any of these. It's just to learn the tools today. So please go ahead for 2 minutes and sketch out 3 possible futures. About 1 more minute for this brainstorm. And while we're finishing this up, I want to invite any of you who want to, this is where we start to get a little more interactive, as is possible with Zoom. If you'd like to add into the chat the possible future that you want to explore today, you're welcome to do that. So you're invited to share your selected possible future if you'd like to. And Terrie, if you see anything that's being chatted in there, possible futures, do you want to read one or two? If
Yes, I would be happy to. We don't see any contributed to the chat yet, but I'll watch for them closely.
Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll keep moving then. So now with the one that you have selected to work with today, we're going to do about 3 minutes of writing to start to flesh this one out. Start visualizing, sketching it out. What would this possible future look like? And the workbook is not interactive, so at this point you'll need to for this activity, at this point you'll need to have a piece of paper, someplace to write this on. So in this possible future, where are you? Who are you with? What are you doing and why are you doing it? What types of skills are you using or tools? How does it feel to be in this possible future, doing what you're doing? What else seems important to you? What's the purpose of this work? So anything, these are just guides, these questions, but anything that you think is important or anything you notice about this future, please take 3 minutes to begin to flesh it out on paper.
And as you're beginning to do that, let me just mention that we have people who are thinking about things such as Director of Alumni Relations, ranging all the way to lead instructor of the Hero's Journey workshops, drama teacher, research in ornithology, creating supplemental income, user experience, accessibility work. So quite a variety.
Oh, I love that. I'm getting chills just hearing all those different kinds of things. How wonderful. So using the one that you've just picked, 3 minutes of writing to begin to describe what this job might be like. And just to clarify, I said what this job might be like, but it might be something else. It could be retirement, it could be volunteer work, or any number of things. So just there's lots of flexibility to write about whatever your possible future might be. about 1 more minute, and I just thought of another question for you. What are you wearing in this possible future? Please wrap up what you're writing now. Again, you can come back to this later. The next part of the process of exploring these possible futures is to assess them on a few different factors. So this, what you see in front of you is adapted from Designing Your Life, the book that Terrie mentioned earlier. And on page 5 in the workbook are these gauges. You will see a version of this in the workbook. And what we'd like you to do now is think about this possible future you just wrote about. Do you have the resources necessary? Do you have the time, the money, the skills from 0 to 100? Do you have what's necessary to realize this future? Do you like it? Cold to hot? Or is it maybe something that somebody else thinks you should do? Or maybe you just think you should do it because you can't do anything else. So there could be some of that negative, some of those voices, we all have them. But in your heart of hearts, how much do you like it? Do you feel passionate about it? And then how confident are you that you would succeed? And lastly, coherence. So thinking again about that compass. How aligned is this possible future with your values, your skills, the things that matter to you, the things that give your life meaning? Is it coherent? And these gauges, these are just a few lenses to look through, and they don't tell the whole story. In fact, you will probably find as you're exploring this possible future that there's a lot that you don't know. You may have questions about things. So do pay attention to where you're curious. And we're going to spend 1 minute, 1 additional minute on these gauges. So evaluating your chosen possible future against these 4 issues. Oh, and please, you'll see in the workbook, please give this possible future a title. All right, Terrie, back to you.
Yes, as I unmute myself, thank you, Susan. So remember that we talked about this being a design lab. And remember we were talking about the questions that your possible future, the one you're going to work with today, the questions that are suggested to you as you fill out these gauges. That's where we're heading now. So we're going to pair these concepts with that mindset of having a bias to action, taking things into the real world to get unstuck and keep moving. That's the only way we can build a way future. So the image that you see, the picture on this slide, is actually a backpack design. But what you might not be able to tell so easily in the picture is that it's made of cardboard. It's a prototype, an inexpensive, low-effort experiment to test the design. So prototypes are how designers take their ideas and questions into the real world. So I love, Dave Evans has this great YouTube video about prototyping, and to quote his comments, he says, "Good prototyping is cheap, fast, and teaches us something." So in this case, as Susan was just saying, probably some of the gauges that you just filled in on the last activity, or I would bet that some of them were easier to gauge than others. The ones that are harder to gauge, I bet you've got some questions that would help you have information to make a better estimate of how you would feel on the resources or the confidence to do that particular thing. So that's why we're going to spend some time dealing with this notion of prototyping. So I love the idea that we prototype to create experiences, reveal our assumptions, also to fail fast but fail forward, and to sneak up on the future. So let's do it. Now, Susan, if we could have the next slide, please. So the main answer to that question, how we do this, is we notice the questions that come up as we sketch out a possible future. Again, your dashboard indicators probably surface some questions. Now, what information would help you? Capture your questions and craft them in a way that will help you fill in the blanks. And we're going to talk about how to fill those blanks in, how to do some prototyping in a minute. But it rests on having good questions. So, for example, what's the experience like of doing the work that you might want to do? How would that possible future align with my compass, my important skills, values, important events in our lives, and so on? What are the trends in the field? And what changes are anticipated in the future? You may notice that none of these 4 sample questions can be answered by the word yes or the word no. So in other words, they're open-ended, and you can't just look up the answers, right? On the whole, they're questions that invite you to gather in-depth information, usually from other people and your own experience. So the questions you want to explore now probably differ from questions you might have asked a year ago, or the questions you might ask a year from now, before the novel coronavirus struck, before events that are highlighting so much social justice issues, other events as well. So what I think is important is to be aware of where you are now, what questions are occurring to you now, and to stay open, because questions may change over time. One last thing about questions for prototyping. At the bottom of the screen, you see that should I do X, Y, or Z is not a prototyping question. Instead, that's a decision, and only you can make a decision like that. You can't prototype the decision. But prototyping gives you better information so that the decisions you make will be more based in both reality and your own experience. Okay, next slide, please. Generally speaking, there are 2 ways to run those kinds of experiments. The first is talking with people who are already doing it. And the second is having live embodied experiences. Both of these are going to be important. And as we talk a little bit about the second one, how to have live embodied experiences, you might take a look at pages 10 to 12 of your workbook, where resources to help you prototype are listed. I just want to highlight a couple of them that people may or may not be aware of. For example, you probably know you have LinkedIn access, right? Well, you can nurture your professional network and identify people to ask for informational interviews by using LinkedIn. Of course, you can take LinkedIn learning courses. Visit the site MyUC Career. One of the tools there is general descriptions of many occupations in the UC system. That's really valuable information. There are even some places on campus that have fellowships for staff. Student affairs possibly At this point, since my departure from Cal, I know there were a couple of other places that were developing fellowships where people would have the chance to conduct a project in another area of their division. So, several resources to consider about prototyping. Over to you, Susan.
Great. So we're going to spend a little time exploring those questions that have come up. So in your workbook, it's page 6. You have a graph there on column A. Step A is where you can log the questions that are coming up for you. So one per row. So Terrie mentioned a few things earlier that might be good prototyping questions. Some other examples: you might want to know what skills are important in this job. You might want to know what a typical day is like. You might want to know how flexible your work schedule could be, or what a typical salary is. There's many, many possibilities of questions that could be coming up. So in your workbook, on page 6 and 7, we have space for lots of questions. So please just work on column A, step A. What questions are coming up for you? And we'll give you 2 minutes to brainstorm those questions. About 1 more minute to document your questions. And for those of you who have already done so, if you'd like to, you're invited to share in the chat a question that you'd like to explore for the next part of these exercises today. So if you pick one question that seems like a good juicy one that you'd like to explore, you're invited to type it into the chat. We have still about 30 more seconds to brainstorm questions.
One of those nice, juicy questions comes from a participant. How can I gain field experience with as much close supervision as possible? Great. Thank you for sharing that.
So please feel free to add more questions. It helps other people think too. So it's not easy to brainstorm together on Zoom, so we're using the chat for that today. So we're moving to the next step. In your workbook, it's column B, step B, which is beginning to figure out how to prototype to get answers to the questions that you have in column A. So again, just pick one to work with today. And we'd like you to think about at least 5 ways that you might learn more by prototyping. And Terrie already referenced the middle of the workbook. I think it's pages 10 to 13, where there's so many different resources at Berkeley and beyond that you can use to try to get answers to the questions that you're coming up with. And try to generate both kinds of prototyping questions. So some things might be talking with people or taking a class, but then there might also be some lived experiences. So for example, I proposed a brief mini internship with the retirement center to get some experience and see if I might like to do that kind of work at some point. So there's little things you can think of perhaps to to get some experience. So you might, again, some things you might do more on the left-hand side. You might surf the web for information. If I was thinking about a fundraising career, for example, I might talk to my friend who works in development at UC Berkeley to get more information. I might look into LinkedIn Learning, as Terrie suggested. But I also might want to do something like sit in on a meeting with my friend, if possible, or again, set up a mini internship. So please take, let's see, what do we have here? Actually, about 5 minutes now to brainstorm answers to step B. How could you get answers to these questions? So 5 minutes on this.
So some other questions have come in that I just want to acknowledge a theme that I'm seeing. Lots of questions that talking with people who already do the work, informational interview style could be helpful. One participant asked, who could I speak with about a skill I haven't used in 20 years? Who's done this job recently and can fill in what I don't know? Someone else is asking about teaching degrees needed for drama teachers, how to get government positions. I would suggest that these kinds of questions are great for informational interviewing and research tools to help you identify people to talk with. You're probably going to use more than one resource to identify those people. And I'm just going to remind everyone that, to mute themselves, please.
About 1 more minute for this section. Okay, great. And now we invite you once again to use the chat. You're invited, you're not required. But if you'd like to, you can share some of the prototyping experiments that you are thinking about doing. So let's share with each other some of the things that you're thinking of doing to get answers to those questions. And I also want to invite you, if you have an idea for somebody else in the chat, you're welcome also to suggest something for another participant if you saw a question that you have an idea about. And Terrie, I wonder if you could read, I see that people are adding to the chat. I wonder if you could read some of what's coming up.
Certainly. The first idea I see is volunteer to write a grant for someone as a test of my ability to develop a research project. That's great.
That would be one of those lived experience type of prototyping experiments.
Yeah, and I also see emphasis on informational interviews and hopefully mentorships. So both are covered there.
Okay, Terrie.
Thank you. Okay, so this process of career development, life design, it's not always easy. Journeys do hit obstacles. I'd like to take the pulse of the group right now with our second poll. What's on your mind right now in late July of 2020 that might feel like an obstacle? Of course, the poll is anonymous. So Angela, would you please launch poll number 2? Thank you. Go ahead and select as many of these as apply to you. By the way, you might need to scroll up or down to see them all. Yeah, okay, let's take another 30 seconds. So if you could finish up, please.
Wow, these are piling in. This is great.
Yeah. Okay, Angela, I'm going to suggest that you go ahead and end the poll in maybe 10 more seconds. I thought we'd stabilized at numbers, but they keep rising. That's awesome. Thanks, everyone. Okay, we can end it now. And I think people are seeing the results. So a couple of things really kind of all the way through our time together. I don't know what I want led. Led as the number one choice of most of the people. Another, of course, is competing priorities. I don't have the time right now. So some trends that seem to hold sway from the beginning of our time polling all the way through to the end. Some questions about, gee, I'm nervous about change. What if I fail? I'm not sure I can really do it. By the way, these are you're not alone in any of these. These obstacles face people, but the good news, if there is good news, which I believe there is that there are techniques and strategies to help with all of these. We have a page in the workbook actually that's called Your Roadside Safety and Service Resources. So what we're talking about is, what do you reach for when the going gets tough? So counselors like myself often categorize obstacles to progress as either internal or external, and the poll included some of both. COVID and its implications, of course, is a huge example of an external event. And these definitely alter the landscape. I'd actually be willing to bet that external factors like competing priorities, which we saw, and maybe even limits and opportunities right now, are probably in mind for many people, both at the Now conference today and throughout our world, actually. Internal obstacles also make a difference. One way to think of these is habits of thinking that might hold us back. Even if they had a wonderful function at some point in our lives, sometimes these habits become less productive over time in a different circumstance. So an example would be, what if I think there's nothing I can do for myself in the current climate? It might be very true that the changing landscape limits options right now, but that thought, there's nothing I can do, if I repeat it often enough, could keep me from taking even the steps that are possible. And it could also erode my confidence, my energy, and my emotional health. There are strategies to work with both internal and external obstacles. In a moment, we're going to ask you what you do that helps you when the going gets tough. What do you reach for inspiration, motivation, energy, and so on? And I'm really confident that this group has lots of good tips for each other. But a few general points before we go there. On the internal side, research over decades has shown that cultivating a realistic but optimistic belief in one's abilities is critical, fundamental to moving forward. So being aware of the thoughts that come up over and over again, questioning the negative ones, maybe even reframing those thoughts to more positive ones, like, gee, if this experiment doesn't work, I'll know something I didn't know before. That's one important strategy. I really like to think about trying new things where failure is even a possibility as experiments. Those that work out, great. Those that don't work out, great. I learned something and that's a success. Coaching conversations are actually especially helpful when someone wants to build a more positive self-talk or confidence or dealing with internal obstacles in general. And the thing is that many UC Berkeley staff members don't know that you have access to a career coaching appointment with a certified coach on campus. Again, in a workbook on the resources page, actually page 10, there's information about career coaching that's available to you at no charge. What about external obstacles? Even if action is limited, it's really important to do the things that you can do. For example, it might be talking with your manager about your career or suggesting a different way to support students in this time of COVID. Someone shared by the chat that they could volunteer to write a grant for someone else. These are all great examples. And in the middle of change, I would say that just getting more information about the current situation and future plans to the degree that they're known, that counts as taking action. Last, of course, community is fundamental. It's important to know that your resources really do include those people in your life who can give you active encouragement and those who you can actively encourage. So build the community of people around you, stay in touch with your colleagues, and that's also helpful for even holding yourself accountable to take those baby steps that we're focusing on today. Okay, next slide, please. All right. I'm going to orient myself here just a second. So we're at the point where I'd like to invite you to share your roadside safety plans, those resources you reach for, with each other. Before we actually do that, which we're going to do using the whiteboard feature, I just want to call your attention to the steps you'll need to follow that are on the slide right now. you'll need to go to View Options in the Zoom pull-down menu, click Annotate, and then click T or Text to create text boxes that you can type into. That's where we're going to invite you to type in a few of the things that you do to keep yourself going when the going gets tough. After that, in step 2, we're going to ask you to endorse some of the ideas that others have contributed that you like, that you think you could use. And then we'll have kind of an overall picture and can see what emerges. The steps for doing that are to hover over or choose the term stamp in the Annotate menu, select the shape of your choice, and then on the whiteboard to go ahead and click near the idea you want to endorse. Okay, so take a second just to kind of register those 3 steps. I'll be putting them in the chat box as well, although I have a feeling others may have already done that for me. And then Susan, if you would please go ahead and launch the whiteboard.
Okay, do you see the whiteboard now?
Yes. And thank you for adding the, sorry, I think I see the whiteboard.
Let's try this.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
I see what looks like a whiteboard, but I'm not able to annotate in it. Yeah, share the screen did you share the screen?
I'm clicking on resume share, and let's see. Let me do a new share, see if that works.
There we go.
Do you see a whiteboard?
There is a whiteboard.
Okay.
I do not see annotate, however. Which is something that we've not had happen in all of our projects.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Susan, I think we may need to go to plan B.
Okay, let's see. Let me try one more time the whiteboard, because we so want to share the whiteboard with you. And let's see.
So annotate, when it does show up, folks, will be in View Options. If you see that menu on my screen, it's up at the very top.
I actually have the ability, maybe you all have this. Do you see a little board? You click a T for text, and then please share your ideas. Can you see this?
Yes, we can see it. I think the rest of us, for some reason, don't have the annotate feature right now.
Okay. Angela, I'm wondering, is there any setting that you can adjust so that the participants can write on the whiteboard?
So Avi is saying we'd have to make everyone co-hosts. So that would be, or you'll have to give participants access to the whiteboard. So I'm going to suggest that we do this differently.
Okay.
And what if we do this? How about if we use the chat feature to have everyone share one of the things that they do, one of the things they reach for when the going gets tough, and then I'll read some out. How's that?
That sounds excellent. Thank you.
Okay. And then I think you could probably dismiss the whiteboard, Susan.
Yes.
Okay, I see. Go to the beach. Journal. Reach out to people who've been supportive in the past. Avoid those who have felt critical. Make a checklist. Exercise. Reach out to family and friends. Take a break from it. Family support. Listen to a good playlist. Get sleep. Meditate. I see meditate coming up often. Go for a boba and take a walk, by the way. I saw something about quotes. I'm wondering if that was referring to inspiring quotes. Create a mantra and make it visible. Excellent thoughts. Think of my daughter's future. Reach out to a personal board of directors. That's great. Sketching, drawing. Shannon says, excellent ideas. Dance. Let's see, bake. Oh, yes, I hear that sourdough is a real thing right now, right? My husband does our marketing once a week, and he has trouble finding flour because we're all baking so much. Cuddle with my cute cat. Do things like the Now Conference. This is awesome. Talk it out with someone who will just listen. Terrific people. And 17 new messages. Play with a new puppy. Engage in your passion. Create a list of things I want to do toward my goal and make it visible. Pick one thing at a time. Thank you. Well, I wish we could, I wish that, that's so in tune with our workshop today. Career counseling at UCB. Paint. Acknowledge the challenge. The only way out is through. Yeah, you can't go around it. You can't go under it. You can't go over it. The only way to go is through it. But take your safety and service resources with you. Just say, go Bears. Thanks, Daryl. Create an in-home spa moment for myself. Awesome ideas. All right, folks. Well, there are a lot of ideas here, which is just terrific. Thank you for engaging in this activity. We don't see the collection of ideas on the whiteboard. Thank you for humoring us as we tried using that technical adjunct. But what I'd like you to do right now, since what we jot down for ourselves and commit to is, generally speaking, what actually gets done, I'd like you to go ahead either on page 8 of your workbook or on a piece of paper. Really take a minute to jot down some of the things that other people said or your own favorite ideas that you're going to try out for yourself. Create your own toolkit for roadside safety. So I'm going to say take 2 minutes to do that. By the way, if you need more action items, more resources, more are coming through in the chat, so take a look if you want. My personal favorite seemed to come up twice, Rocky Road ice cream. Thank you for that.
And you all, I believe you can all save the chat yourselves. There's the 3 dots. I think you should be able to save the chat afterwards. So if you'd like to go back and look at what other people wrote, and then it might be something you want to come back to later to get more ideas.
So take about 1 more minute to finish jotting down ideas you want to try. It's so important right now to have a toolkit ready. All right, well, thanks everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Susan now for the next segment.
We're now moving to page 9 of the workbook to figure out some experiments and baby steps that you would like to take in the next few weeks to make progress towards these dreams and goals. And we'll have about 3 minutes to brainstorm some next steps. And again, through the poll, we hear that some of you are not clear about your next steps. And or your possible futures, I really want to normalize that there were many, many of you who were not certain. And so perhaps your next steps will be related to just doing some more self-exploration and doing maybe more informational interviews or talking with folks. So it's 100% fine not to know. That's actually a really interesting place to be, even though it can sometimes be frustrating. So please pull up page 9 of your workbook, and we're going to brainstorm 2 to 5 simple actions. What will you do and by when? So these things could be as small as reading an article or talking to somebody that you know, or maybe it's a little bit larger, like having an informational interview or looking into fellowships. Doesn't matter how big or small each step is. As we mentioned at the beginning, the key is to embrace a bias to action. Set the bar low and clear it. And I will tell you that I am a big believer in the babiest of baby steps. I break every goal into the teeniest, tiniest steps, and then I can feel really good about checking them off. And I feel like I have momentum. And then also, we really encourage you to ask a family member, a friend, a coworker, somebody to be your accountability partner. Somebody that you tell that you're committed to this. Someone who agrees to check in with you about how you're doing with your baby steps and your goals. So this is a really key piece. There's research that shows that this accountability piece and having a partner is a big part of what actually helps people reach their goals and accomplish things. So please take about 2 minutes now and write in on page 9 what you would like to do in the next 2 weeks, by when, and who can help you stay accountable.
By the way, Vincent calls it an accountability buddy, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly, but thanks for the new word, Vincent.
That's funny. That's great.
Yeah.
So we still have another minute or so, but now that you know the routine, we invite you to put into the chat anything that you'd like to be accountable for. You now have 169, or I guess you have 168. What was it? Accountability buddy. What was it?
Accountability buddy?
Accountability.
It's great. It just trips off the tongue, right? And it's and keeps you laughing, which is great.
Yes. Well, you have 168 of those on this call. So if there's something you'd like to commit to, we invite you to add it into the chat. We still have another 30 seconds or so if you want to add anything else to this page in the workbook. Okay, so we'll wrap this up. Again, feel free to keep adding into the chat if you'd like. And Terrie.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, everyone. We're about ready to close today's workshop. And with our hope that you've thoroughly enjoyed the whole conference today and that you enjoy the rest of it. As we close, I really want to invite you to do something which is to, as I as I manage all of the chat and everything on the windows here, I'm going to chat to everyone the link for a Google form that Susan and I invite you to respond to. I just chatted it, and let me tell you what it does. That will give us the opportunity, to follow up with you a month from now with a message that in the Google form you'll write to yourself. So think about what words of encouragement or inspiration you'd like to hear in a month. Your message could also be a reminder of your goals, the dreams and commitments you've made to yourself today. This will be a chance for you to put those in, and then we'll send them privately to each and every person who's filled out the Google form. We'll also be able to send you key portions of today's chat after we've taken out people's names, and we'll in all likelihood include the workbook again as well. So with that, I want to thank Susan not only for running the slides today and being a fabulous partner to work with on this entire workshop, Angela for moderating, our work study students for managing the closed caption today, as well as for making your workbook fillable. And I know Susan has a word or two to say, and on behalf of all of us, thank you all very much. Wish you the best.
Yes, thank you all for joining us. This was really fun, and you got to see us experimenting with something new too. And as Terry said, sometimes experiments fail, as our whiteboard did, but we learned something and we just pivoted and used the chat. So thank you for surfing that with us, and we're really so pleased to be with you here today and look forward to hearing from you through that Google form. And thank you, Angela. Thank you, Terry, for all the great slides and the workbook and everything. And we wish you all well.
Over to you, Angela.
Thank you so much, Terry and Susan. It was great. Thank you all for being with us. Thanks, Terry and Susan, for your inspiring workshop and for all these amazing resources. We really, really appreciate you and appreciate this. After the break, we'll be moving into our keynote at 3:15. So thank you again, Terry and Susan. Thank you all for your amazing, amazing work today in the workshop. We're going to save the chat and get that out to you. And we'll see you here in just a few minutes in hopefully the dance or in the keynote at 3:15. Thanks, everybody.